Throughout the annals of world history, the planet has witnessed innumerable wars that have ravaged lands and claimed lives on a global scale. These wars have been sparked by various causes, including religious differences, territorial disputes, politics, and ethnicity. While wars are inherently destructive and costly, there are certain conflicts in history that stand out for their staggering death tolls and extensive destruction. This video delves into the top 10 deadliest wars in human history, examining their origins, overall casualties, and the toll they exacted on both military personnel and civilians. By shedding light on the devastating capacity of war, we aim to foster a deeper understanding among viewers about the dire consequences of armed conflicts. 10. 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, which raged across Central Europe from 1618 to 1648, involved major European powers of the time. What began as a religious conflict between Protestant and Catholic states within the crumbling Holy Roman Empire soon escalated, engulfing much of the continent. With massive armies, including a significant presence of mercenaries, the war resulted in an immense loss of life, earning its place as one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Beyond its religious roots, the 30 Years' War expanded due to dynastic and territorial rivalries that were prevalent during that era. Political leaders saw the war as an opportunity to reshape Europe in their favor, and poured vast resources into the conflict, leading to catastrophic consequences. When peace was finally achieved with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, the face of Europe and its traditional boundaries had been irreversibly altered. How many people died during the 30 Years' War? The 30 Years' War took a devastating toll on Europe, resulting in an estimated 8 million deaths and countless wounded individuals. The widespread destruction caused by the conflict also led to rampant disease outbreaks, with bubonic plague, dysentery, and typhus reaching epidemic levels. German and Italian communities were particularly hard hit by these diseases. Furthermore, the war left many of the warring powers bankrupt, making post-war reconstruction efforts incredibly challenging. The immense scale of destruction and financial strain left Europe struggling to recover in the aftermath of the war. As a result, the 30 Years' War stands as one of the deadliest and bloodiest conflicts in human history, with its far-reaching consequences serving as a grim reminder of the devastating impact of war on societies and individuals. 9. Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Civil War, spanning the mid-20th century, was a conflict between communist forces and the Republic of China, divided into two phases due to the outbreak of World War II. The first phase took place from 1927 to 1936, followed by the second phase from 1946 to 1950. The conflict arose after the collapse of the Qing Dynasty, with competing government and communist forces vying for power in the resulting power vacuum, leading to devastating consequences. The situation was exacerbated by foreign political and military aid, particularly from the Soviet Union, which deepened the hostilities between the communists and nationalists. Both sides launched campaigns to eradicate each other, fueling the conflict further. The outbreak of the Second World War and the invasion of China by the Japanese Empire briefly halted hostilities, but military unrest resumed after the war as the Kuomintang and communist forces resumed fighting on the streets. In the end, despite the eventual victory of the communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong, the Chinese people paid a tremendous cost in terms of human lives lost during the Civil War. How many people died in the Chinese Civil War? The Chinese Civil War resulted in a staggering loss of human life, with an estimated nearly 8 million deaths, including both military personnel and civilians. Many of these casualties are attributed to mass atrocities and genocides perpetrated by both communist and Kuomintang forces throughout the duration of the war. The toll of regular fighting alone was also immense, with an estimated 2 million dead and wounded. The overall numbers of casualties, including dead and wounded, rise exponentially, reaching an estimated 15.5 million in total. Despite the eventual victory of the communists and the introduction of communism into China, the suffering of the Chinese people did not abate. In fact, Mao's Great Leap Forward policies resulted in the deaths of millions of his own people in the decades that followed, further extending the tragic consequences of the war. 8. The Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War, which took place from 1917 to 1926, was a brutal and protracted conflict involving multiple parties, including the Red Army, Communist, and White Army, Nationalist forces. It erupted following the collapse of the Russian Empire and the dissolution of Tsar Nicholas II's power, as Bolshevik forces under Vladimir Lenin vied for control of the Russian interior against nationalist troops, resulting in widespread loss of life and destruction of property. Lasting for approximately 6 years, the war pitted Russian against Russian, with numerous skirmishes and battles erupting across the country. Despite the staggering losses suffered by all sides in the conflict, the cessation of hostilities proved to be short-lived. The victorious communist regime, which emerged from the war, immediately unleashed an era of terror and repression in the decades that followed, further adding to the tragic legacy of the Russian Civil War. How many people died in the Russian Civil War? Determining the exact death toll of the Russian Civil War is a challenging task due to the chaotic nature of the time, with the radical transfer of power from the Tsar to revolutionary forces. However, historians currently estimate that approximately 9 million lives were lost during the conflict, with millions more left maimed or severely wounded. Additionally, there were countless casualties that were not officially counted in the death toll, as millions succumbed to war-related circumstances such as famine, epidemics, and starvation. Ukraine, in particular, suffered greatly, with an estimated loss of nearly 2 million people due to famine, disease, and repressive measures carried out by the communist regime between 1921 and 1923. The human toll of the Russian Civil War and its aftermath was immense, with millions of lives tragically lost or affected by the devastating consequences of the conflict. 7. The Dungan Revolt. The Dungan Revolt, also known as the Hui Minorities' War, was a religious conflict that took place in western China from 1862 to 1877. It erupted when Hui Muslims rose up in response to religious and racial discrimination perpetrated by the Qing dynasty. In retaliation, the Qing government swiftly launched brutal reprisals and massacres against Hui Muslims throughout western China, employing a campaign of total war against both rebel fighters and innocent Muslim civilians. Despite valiant efforts by the Hui rebels, who fought with courage for several years, their lack of coordination, leadership, and organization proved to be their undoing. The Qing army's superior resources and firepower, coupled with the Hui rebels' difficulty in mounting coordinated attacks, led to their ultimate defeat. The Dungan Revolt was a tragic chapter in Chinese history, marked by violence, discrimination, and the struggles of the Hui Muslim minority against oppressive forces. How many people died during the Dungan Revolt? Given China's vast population and the tumultuous situation in the region during the Dungan Revolt in 1862, determining the exact death toll is challenging for scholars. However, current estimates suggest that approximately 10 million lives were lost, with millions more civilians, rebels, and soldiers suffering injuries during the conflict. It's worth noting that these figures may be significantly higher, as the Qing dynasty carried out reprisals against the Hui rebels in the years that followed. As a result, the overall death toll could potentially be as high as 20 million, underscoring the magnitude of the devastation caused by the Dungan Revolt in China. 6. First World War. The First World War, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict that originated in Europe on July 28, 1914. Spanning 4 years, the war saw the mobilization of around 70 million military personnel, as almost every corner of the European continent was embroiled in conflict. When the fighting finally ceased in November 1918, Europe faced unprecedented devastation, with far-reaching impacts on politics, society, economy, and culture. The aftermath of the war brought about significant changes that reverberated throughout the continent, shaping its course in history. How many people died in the First World War? The Great War resulted in an immense loss of life, with approximately 9 million military personnel and an additional 9 to 10 million civilians losing their lives. Scholars attribute these staggering death tolls to technological advancements, such as the machine gun, chemical weapons, and airplanes, which changed the nature of warfare. Furthermore, the aftermath of the war saw revolutions, genocides, and epidemics that caused additional significant loss of life. While not included in the official figures for the First World War, scholars estimate that epidemics and genocides alone may have resulted in an additional 50 to 100 million lives lost in the years and decades that followed. To this day, the Great War remains one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, with its far-reaching impacts on global history and the memory of the millions who perished during and after the war. 5. Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion, also known as the Taiping Civil War, was a significant civil conflict that took place in China from 1850 to 1864. Led by Hong Xiuquan, who believed he was the brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping forces waged a nationalist, political, and religious war against the Qing dynasty, aiming to convert the Chinese people to Christianity and overthrow the Qing government. With their stronghold in modern-day Nanjing, the Taiping rebels gained control over sizable portions of South China, with an estimated 30 million people falling under their rule at the peak of their power. Despite initial successes in the first decade of their campaign, including capturing key regions, the Taiping rebels faced challenges. An attempted coup and their failure to capture Beijing, the capital city of China, led to internal fractures and ultimately contributed to their downfall. The breakdown of their centralized command structure resulted in the fragmentation of their own forces, and militia armies, notably the Song Army, were mobilized against the Taiping rebels. Within 2 years, the Song Army pushed the Taiping rebels back to their capital of Nanjing, ultimately capturing the city in June 1864. How many people died during the Taiping Rebellion? Estimating the death toll of the Taiping Rebellion is challenging due to the absence of official records from that era. However, most estimates suggest that the number of casualties ranged from 20 to 30 million, with thousands of others wounded. The Taiping Rebellion remains one of the deadliest civil wars in human history, and it is considered the largest conflict of the 19th century. 4. The Qing Conquest of the Ming Dynasty. The Qing Conquest of the Ming Dynasty, also known as the Ming-Qing Transition or Manchu Conquest of China, was a prolonged conflict that lasted from 1618 to 1683. It originated from a series of grievances known as the Seven Grievances, which highlighted the major social and political issues faced by China during that time. Rebel groups, supported by peasant bands, rose up against the ruling Ming dynasty with the aim of bringing about reform. Over the course of nearly 70 years, city after city fell to the rebels, and many Ming officers and government officials defected to the rebel cause as the futility of Ming's victory became apparent. The rebel groups eventually coalesced to form the Qing dynasty in 1644, with Hong Taiji as their first emperor. However, it took almost 40 more years to achieve complete victory, as pockets of resistance from Ming sympathizers persisted in the south, resulting in brutal fighting for several decades. How many people died as a result of the Qing conquest? Estimating the overall fatalities of the Qing conquest of the Ming dynasty, like many conflicts of that era, is challenging due to the immense social, political, and economic upheaval caused by the war and subsequent transition. However, current estimates suggest that approximately 25 million people lost their lives as a direct result of the conflict, with millions more suffering injuries and scars from numerous battles. Additionally, tens of thousands may have perished due to military reprisals against Ming loyalists, including both military personnel and civilians. Despite efforts to determine accurate figures, exact fatalities remain elusive. Nevertheless, the Qing conquest of the Ming dynasty is widely regarded as one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, and certainly the largest of the 17th century. The tremendous human cost of this prolonged conflict is a somber reminder of the profound impact it had on China's history and people. 3. Second Sino-Japanese War. The Second Sino-Japanese War was a brutal conflict that occurred between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan from the 7th of July 1937 to the 2nd of September 1945. Regarded as one of the bloodiest wars in human history, Japanese forces engaged in rampant atrocities such as rape, pillage, and killing of Chinese civilians and military personnel in their ruthless pursuit of victory. The war originated from Japan's aggressive expansionist ambitions in Asia, where they sought to extend their control and influence over the region's abundant resources, labor, and food for their growing empire. Using an incident near the Marco Polo Bridge in Wanping as a pretext for invasion, Japanese forces swiftly overwhelmed Chinese defenses in July 1937, deploying around 500,000 troops. Despite valiant resistance from the Chinese throughout the war, which lasted until the conclusion of World War II in 1945, Japan implemented a brutal and oppressive system of control that brought the country to its knees, inflicting widespread suffering and devastation. How many people died during the Second Sino-Japanese War? The death toll of the Second Sino-Japanese War is estimated to be nearly 29 million people, although exact figures vary depending on the source. Shockingly, it is believed that approximately 20 to 25 million of these fatalities were civilians, with around 4 to 5 million being military personnel from both China and Japan. These numbers highlight the brutality and murderous intent of the Japanese forces during their occupation. Numerous memoirs and accounts recount the horrific violence inflicted upon Chinese civilians, whom the Japanese military regarded as subhuman. Mass executions, widespread rape, and deliberate starvation were just a few of the heinous atrocities committed. In the infamous rape of Nanjing, for instance, it is estimated that nearly 300,000 Chinese civilians were brutally killed, and an additional 20,000 women were raped by Japanese troops. These appalling acts have earned the Second Sino-Japanese War the reputation of being one of the bloodiest conflicts in world history. 2. Lushan Rebellion. The Lushan Rebellion was a colossal war that erupted in China on the 16th of December 755 AD. It lasted for almost 8 years and was triggered by General Lushan's audacious declaration of himself as Emperor of Northern China, defying the established Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty, fearing the imminent collapse of their rule, hired around 4,000 mercenaries to bolster their army in the ensuing battles. The conflict spanned the reign of 3 different emperors and caused immense social, economic, and political upheaval throughout China until the rebellion was ultimately suppressed in 763 AD. How many people died as a result of the Lushan Rebellion? Estimating the exact death toll of the Lushan Rebellion is challenging due to the chaotic social and political situation that arose from the widespread upheaval of various populations in the region. While combat-related fatalities were undoubtedly significant on both sides, historians also need to account for deaths resulting from the economic devastation caused by large-scale battles. The destruction of crops and food sources led to widespread starvation and disease among the civilian population as the war escalated. Census comparisons before and after the rebellion indicate a staggering drop in population across much of China. Scholars have estimated the overall deaths, including both military and civilians, to be around 36 million people, although historians caution that the actual fatality rates may be significantly different, due to factors such as mass immigration abroad that could have skewed the numbers. Nevertheless, the Lushan Rebellion remains notorious as one of the most destructive and bloodiest conflicts in human history. 1. Second World War. The Second World War, also known as World War II, was a monumental global conflict that raged from 1939 to 1945, involving almost every nation on the planet. Divided into 2 opposing camps, the Axis and the Allies, these military alliances engaged in total warfare for nearly 6 years, resulting in catastrophic consequences in terms of both human casualties and widespread destruction. Approximately 100 million military personnel from around 30 different countries were drawn into the conflict, with devastating outcomes. The aftermath of the war witnessed the devastation of numerous cities and the loss of millions of lives, leaving an indelible mark on human history. How many people died during World War II? Scholars widely agree that the Second World War resulted in a staggering death toll of approximately 70 million people. Out of these, nearly 20 million were military personnel, while civilians accounted for 40 to 50 million lives lost. The Soviet Union was particularly hard hit, with an estimated 27 million deaths as the war ravaged Eastern Europe for the entire duration of the conflict. While fierce combat played a role in the high casualty numbers, it is notable that a significant portion of the deaths were due to disease, starvation, bombings, and massacres targeting civilian populations. Deliberate genocides were also perpetrated against various ethnic groups, resulting in immense loss of life. The Holocaust, during which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazi regime, stands as a harrowing example of such atrocities. As a result, World War II is widely recognized as the bloodiest and most costly war in human history, with far-reaching consequences that reverberated across Europe, Asia, and Africa for decades to come. In conclusion, the unfortunate truth remains that war continues to plague many parts of the world. Deep-seated ethnic tensions, religious disputes, and differing political ideologies often serve as catalysts for hostility and hatred, leading to conflicts with devastating consequences. In today's modern era, the advent of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction has amplified the destructive potential of war to unprecedented levels in human history. As history has shown, the repercussions of a global conflict can be catastrophic for all involved. It is our fervent hope that history does not repeat itself in the form of another worldwide war. The consequences would be dire and far-reaching, affecting countless lives and leaving scars that would last for generations. It is incumbent upon us all to work towards peaceful solutions, to foster understanding and cooperation among nations, and to strive for a world where war becomes a distant memory. May we all strive towards a future where peace prevails, for the sake of humanity as a whole.